Welcome back to the Uneducated Philosopher. Today's segment, I'd like to talk about Monsanto. If you don't know who Monsanto is, most people do. They're pretty much like the mega corporation, like the Walmart of agricultural business, agribusiness. And over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of buzz and scrutiny and conspiracy theories around Monsanto, and they're the evil corporation that's trying to take over the world. And a lot of times when I hear things like this, first of all, so many companies, you can say, are evil and they try to monopolize everything, and it doesn't really necessarily mean they're trying to control the world. I think for the most part they're just very, very greedy capitalists that might not necessarily be evil. They just believe in the wrong ideals, and they're caught up on what it is that they're doing, and their goal is short-term maximum profits, sparing no expense to any individual's needs. They just really don't care. So I wondered if there's a difference between a greedy corporation and if there actually is such thing as an evil corporation whose main objective is like evil purposes to actually like take over the world. So what I like to do on these video segments, I don't like to come across as like a conspiracy theorist. I don't want to be one of these like Alex Jones type that like tries to take every piece of information and blow it up into a big huge conspiracy theorist. There's always a big plan behind these companies which is going to end up controlling every single one of us, and it's all under the orders of Lucifer type deal. And I think for the most part they're just greedy capitalists doing what they think is right, which is owning absolutely everything. And even though it's not right and it does a lot of damage to people and to the earth, it's still a lot different than being part of some kind of secret satanic cult that takes over the world through government. And I hate how everything is being turned into that big conspiracy. So when I think about stuff like this, the first thing that I try to ask myself is, if I was running an evil empire, if I was Dr. Evil, and I wanted to, put together the evil corporation, what would all that entail? Like, what would I have to do? What would it be that, like, what is it that I would be after? What would I be getting into? So the first thing, people say is, okay, controlling all the currency. So this is why you have a lot of people saying that, those that are in the Fed or the IMF, International Monetary Fund, or the World Bank, a lot of times they get accused of being part of like this evil empire that's trying to control the world. And I could see how people easily buy in to that idea, because let's face it, there's a lot of things that they do that aren't exactly for the people. But at the same time, too, you know, they could just be caught up on capitalist principles. And they think what they're doing is right, the American dream, the capitalist dream. And it might not necessarily be like the intentions of taking over Earth. The one thing that I look at the most is money, controlling all the money. Okay, yeah, that buys you power and influence and so much things around the earth, and obviously he who controls the money is at the higher echelon of things, but that doesn't necessarily control all of humanity, because there are lots of nations out there that control a big part of the money, but there's still other nations that make their own money and do their own thing. So that only goes so far when I look at it. But when I look at another thing, which is things that every human being and every living thing on the planet needs to live, that we cannot get around at all. So like air, water, food. Like, you know, if we can't breathe within 5 minutes, within 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, the brain starts getting permanent damage without oxygen. Water, I think it's a couple days, a week max. Without water, you die. A lot of people dispute food, 2 weeks, a month, some say 6 weeks. Either way, there's a certain amount of time without food, you die. So these three things, there's time periods that without them, you die. Now, when I look at, okay, an evil corporation that would want to destroy the earth, you know, some kind of satanic evil purpose, goal. So then you could look at, you know, these companies that pump all this garbage into the air to destroy our atmosphere. You could say, okay, maybe there's an evil corporation. They have a goal of destroying our air. Or, you know, a company that wants to control all the water supply. You could say, okay, well, you know, we can't live without water, so then we'd have to be dominant on these people. And then, of course, food. Now, water hasn't really been dominated. Like, there's a lot of problems with, you know, there's only so much fresh water left on Earth. You know, Brazil and the Amazon control a certain amount of it. Canada's got a nice chunk of it. There's other places in the world that have got good deposits of fresh water. And you can see when politics are involved, they don't really come straight out and say, yeah, we want to deal with these regions because we want their water. But these regions are being focused on a lot. And you know, because of certain resources like this, all the other countries are jumping in there. You know that their main goal is that they want water. That's like, you know, when a guy goes into buy a horse that he wants, he acts like he wants to buy the farm, and then he settles for the horse, right? And I think a lot of countries do that with the places that have these certain resources that we can't live without. They come in, they say to Canada, like, we want your resources in the tar sands. Oh, and by the way, we'd like to get in on some of that water. So, when I look at stuff like that, I say, okay, some of these corporations, they could possibly be evil corporations. But at the same time, too, they could just be greedy capitalists that don't know any better. Because for the last 150, 200 years, this ideal of capitalism has been pushed onto everybody, that it is the world's best system, it's the right system, it's the free system, and it's all about maximum profits. And it's all about maximum profits for you. So it's easy to get caught up in that principle, and that doesn't necessarily make you evil. So let's go back to Monsanto, and we say, okay, what is it that Monsanto does that labels them as evil? So we look at it and we go, okay, what business are they involved in? Well, they're involved in agriculture. Now, I believe at some point back in the 50s and 60s, they originally started off, I believe it had to do with pesticides and stuff like that for the farming community. So they started off in agriculture, but I don't think it was so much growing aspect. I think it was, they started off with the pesticides and killing germs to help, grow the crops and stuff like that. And I know during a time where I think it was Dow Industries was being scrutinized by the American public for coming out with a chemical. Oh, I believe it was napalm. So there was, world protest going on to shut down this company Dow because they were producing napalm. But at the same time, Monsanto was this little organization that was kind of flying under the radar, and they were pumping out Agent Orange, which destroys all crops. And the whole purpose of Agent Orange was, during the Vietnam War, they thought it would be easy to just go in there and just drop bombs and bomb out the Vietnamese. And then they found out that a lot of the Viet Cong were hiding in Cambodia and other places on the outskirts of and these woods are so thick, the foliage is so heavy, that you can just go ahead and drop bombs like crazy and waste all the money you want, but you don't even know if you're hitting these people, right? So they came out with Agent Orange to drop in, destroy the foliage, expose where these Viet Cong are hiding, and then drop bombs on them that way, napalm, stuff like that. But an interesting thing happened. Not only did they kill all the foliage, but they killed every single crop for the indigenous population. And then the irony of it is that most of the foliage that they destroyed to expose the Viet Cong didn't even expose the Viet Cong at all, because the Viet Cong were not only under the foliage but dug into the ground. So there was this intricate tunnel system, so that you're basically just bombing at random anyway. So the getting rid of the foliage was actually a waste of time, and all they really did was decimate the indigenous population by killing off all their crops. So they basically killed a large population in the oriental part of the world, Southeast Asia. And Monsanto was responsible for producing this chemical. And over the years, they made a lot of money doing this. Now, you could say, are they an evil corporation? Or are they a capitalist corporation? They produced a chemical. It turns out the military wanted that chemical. They didn't ask any questions. They didn't care. They just said, here, do what you want with it. pay us. So they could get away with that. Fine. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say, all right, there you go. There's your excuse. You can justify it that way. But then something very interesting happened after that. Sometime in the 80s, 90s, a lot of American lobbyists, government workers, were going back and forth like they do for all corporations, and they were going from Monsanto, and then they were going back into certain sectors of government. Now, it's interesting to see that the certain sectors of government that they were getting into had everything to do with agriculture, the industry itself. Now, this is at a time where Monsanto was starting to expand into the actual growing of the agriculture. Now, all of a sudden, you could see legislation being changed where all kinds of deadly pesticides and chemicals were being allowed on the market, which made Monsanto larger than life. But a most interesting thing that happened was at some point in the 90s, when the whole process of DNA and breaking down genomes and stuff like that occurred, it turned out that you could break down the makeup of any organism, and if there was no patent on the organism, you could have it patented. So because Monsanto was already such a large company with large amounts of money and infinite resources, as soon as this legislation got passed, which pretty much nobody really knew about, they went out and broke down every single kind of crop. They put a genetic makeup to it and had it patented. So they went out and pretty much patented 80% of every kind of growable food out there. And so now they own, certain seeds on certain crops, which is unthought of. It's never been done before in the whole history of human beings. It's been completely unthought of, right? So that kind of makes you wonder, like, well, what's the purpose? What is the purpose of all this? Why did they do this? And then you ask yourself, well, there's got to be more than just the capitalistic gain behind this now. Like, it makes you wonder, like, why is it that we want to control every single thing that's being grown by owning it? If we put a patent on the potato, that means if you grow the potato, you have to pay me. And then they start coming out with chemicals that destroys all the other plants out there. And they came out with chemicals that they can genetically engineer to pollinate the other plants in the area through the air. It's aerial. So basically, plan to wipe out all the other crops and leave just these crops that are patented by Monsanto. And then, they want to make it so that other plants can't produce seeds. Only they can. And then it's owned by them. So basically what it comes down to is they're trying to make it so that anything that grows in the ground that you consume is going to be run by them. Now, there's a capitalistic end where, it's smart. They're gonna get a percentage of every single piece of food that gets consumed by every human being on a daily basis. That's the end goal. Capitalistically, that's very, very smart. That puts you at the very top, and it keeps you at the very top. But also on a flip side to that, one can't help but wonder, okay, so what's to stop them from going, alright, you know what? There's 9 billion people on the planet. We only really want to feed 5. So we're going to have 5 that we handpick, and the rest of the 4 can just starve to death, which is absolutely inhumane. But what's to stop them from doing that? And that's the problem where we cross the line and we say, okay, is this a capitalistic company, or is Monsanto an evil corporation? And time will tell. But the problem is should we sit back and let time tell? I mean, what happens in 20 years from now when they own every piece of food and then they decide to just start screwing people over? I mean, there was a time in the Roman Empire when they controlled all the grain supply coming in from Egypt. So during times of civil war, a person could hold back the grain supply and people would be dropping like flies because they completely relied on state subsidy for grain. So we need to ask ourselves questions like that. Like, do we really want to put a company like Monsanto, whether they're evil or not, in a position where if they want to just say, no, you're not eating, you won't eat, and you're not allowed to grow this and you're not allowed to do that, and we can legally have police come in and rip your crops out of the ground because we own the rights, the copyright to that? And this is something that, you know, whether they're evil or not, we need to stop. So when it comes to corporations like that I think that are trying to not just own everything that you do, but own your whole life source, where your life is in their hands, it's pretty sadistic, and it kind of goes more than just capitalist ideals. So I do think Monsanto is an evil corporation in a lot of ways, but I don't like to just jump in conclusions and be like, they're part of the Illuminati, and you know, the Pope works for them, and he takes advice from Satan, and you know, like, just crazy, stupid shit. The most part, it's, you know, a bunch of blood-hungry capitalists that want to control everything. But then there gets to a certain point where lines get crossed. So, you know, we need to ask ourselves, you know, is Monsanto an evil corporation? If they're not, or if we think they might be, do we want to give them the power where they can turn into one if they want to? So that's just some food for thought on Monsanto. My next segment, I'm going to be going more into this subject. It's not just going to stop there, because I want to get into more about Monsanto and more about genetically engineered foods. I just like to keep the video segments down to certain time blocks, so they're not so long. So we're going to continue this on and give people a day or so to check this part of the video out, and then I'll continue on to a part 2. Thanks a lot. Cheers.